Let's talk about this card. Now, we're going to start off here. Let's go to, let's start at the top. Actually, okay, I have Ian Garry versus Shavkat Rakhmonov as the first fight, even though it's not the main event, but this was my favorite fight. And I loved it, man. And I want to tell you a couple reasons why, but then I want to turn it over to you to get your thoughts, because I know a lot of people, Dana White included, wasn't so enthusiastic about this fight and the outcome of the fight. I think simply because there wasn't a finish. And this is the first time Shavkat hasn't gotten a finish. But, I mean, look, man, he is fighting, I think, the best guy in the welterweight division other than himself. I think Ian Garry showed how amazingly skilled he is, how cerebral of a fighter he is, and he was being very cautious and very calculating, paying attention to the distance management, to Shavkat Rakhmonov really doing a tremendous job defending I mean, it was not a lot of actually double legs or single legs, but later, it was a lot of grappling. And I thought Ian Garry did an amazing job. So both of them were very calculated. I mean, so to me, the strategy, the game plan of both of the fighters is absolutely fascinating. And to watch Ian Garry, I think he figured out Shavkat by round 4 and 5 and was just crushing. I mean, I loved it. He almost got a submission, blown away. The entire fight was amazing. But Justin, I need to hear your thoughts.
Man, I tell you what, we're talking about two incredible strikers stepping toe-to-toe in the ring. It's funny because when you have these matchups, it's like, oh, man, these guys are two great strikers. The winner of the fight typically goes to who's better at their secondary moves, their wrestling, their grappling. And I tell you what, I saw some incredible moments from both fighters. It's like Shavkat, Ian Garry would land a big right hand, and Shavkat would be just winging one right back at him, man. It was tit for tat. And then the takedowns in round 4 and 5, and Ian Garry having that tight body lock, getting in that rear naked choke, giving all his effort because he needed to finish that fight going into the fifth round, as I thought he was down on the scorecards. So Huge hat off to Ian Garry, not giving up, always looking for the finish. But then you look at the opposite in the opposition, 19-0 now, Shavkat. This guy's the truth, man. He's the real deal. Ian Garry, I thought it was going to be a tough task. I actually thought Shavkat was going to come in here and steamroll Ian Garry a lot easier than he did. 49-48, or excuse me, 48-47 is as close as he can get besides a split decision. I saw both guys have a lot, but like you said, as the fight went on, I thought Ian Garry was figuring Shavkat out, man, and that's what great fighters do. Their game plan, every fighter has a great game plan coming in round 1, but making those small adjustments going into round 2, round 3, 4, and 5, that's what awesome and expert fighters do, is they make those small adjustments to come. And I thought Ian Garry was making the correct adjustments as the fight went on. Unfortunately, it was only a 5-round fight. Take that fight in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, we might have another winner on our hands here. But Ian Garry did a great job. Unfortunately, it just was a little bit too much, a little too late in the fight.
And not to make excuses on behalf of Ian Garry, and he never said this, so don't, this is not me quoting him or anything, but Ian Garry took the fight on short notice. I mean, I guess Shavkat did as well, right? They both had a change of opponents last minute, so we have to give both of them credit. But I do believe that if they face off again, which I believe they will, I think Ian Garry is going to have an even better game plan, an even more cerebral game plan, and I think he's going to pull it off. Now, one thing I did notice, Justin, so I thought I was paying attention to Ian Garry throughout the fight. He was doing a tremendous job, in my opinion, of beating up the lead leg of Shavkat with both calf kicks, but he was also doing this really interesting technique. I don't know if there's a name for it, and I actually started doing it today when I was shadow boxing because I don't know what it's called. My coaches never showed, but like, he was doing a front kick. It's kind of like the oblique side kick that John Jones throws, like downward pressure on the knee. But it's like a front teep, but he turns his foot at a 45-degree angle. I think he's doing that to maximize the surface area, so to make it a greater probability of making contact with with the position right above the knee. But he kept doing it, turning his foot and boom, kicking the top of Shavkat's knee. And you could see Shavkat really slowing down in the 4th and 5th round. What did you think of that game plan? And is my observation right? Was that exactly, do you know what I'm talking about with that kick?
Yeah, it's just an oblique kick with the lead leg. It's so don't overthink it. It's the same. It's just like think of a teep kick from lead leg to rear leg. It's the same technique. You're just throwing it off your different legs. So yeah, if it's the technique I'm thinking of, it's just a lead leg oblique kick. Very good at slowing your opponent down. And another thing it's really good at is stopping your partner. So if your opponent has a lot of forward pressure and you're hitting this kick, when that kick lands, your opponent has to, he can't just walk through it because he's going to have to adjust his weight to continue to move forward. So it's a great way to stick your partner in a position to where he has to stop for a brief second and you can fire off. I thought the adjustment with the kicks as the fight went on, Ian Garry threw more and more kicks to the legs of Shavkat, and I really thought that was a difference maker. Again, going back to changing your game plan. I don't think he came into the fight anticipating to throw that many kicks, but as the fight went on, the more kicks he threw, the more success I felt he was having.
So what does this tell you? And we're going to talk about Shavkat and Bilal. That, like, I'm sure you were dying laughing when you saw security stop Bilal. But we're going to talk about Shavkat in a second in that matchup going up. I've been looking at some surveys online. It's like 50-50 in terms of who people think will win that eventual title fight. But what does this tell you about Ian Garry? Are you hyped on him now? Do you think he's going to eventually 100% now be champion one day? Like, what are your thoughts?
You can never say someone is 100% going to be the champion, unfortunately, in this sport, because he might fucking get in a car accident on the way home and never be able to fight again, or get hurt in training, or, a lot of times coming back from a loss is tough, man. The more, like, fuck, man, if he loses his next fight, depending, I know the UFC wants to build him, but this is what I was concerned about. I always thought that Shavkat was going to win this fight, former training partners. Watching Ian Garry in the fight lead up, I thought was really weird. I didn't really care for how buddy he was being. Hey, listen, I'm all about showing respect. You'll see me on my Instagram posting pictures of me and my opponent before the fight, but I'm not going out of my way to be, hey, buddy with him, hugging him 2-3 times, almost in an uncomfortable way. Like I said, that interaction I saw before, and you're like, oh, they're teammates and stuff, and that's great. But you look at Ian Garry's demeanor, like he's smiling, he's like, hey, man, hey, and Shavkat's just straight face, hugs him back. Then he gives his teammate a hug, and he comes back to hug Shavkat again, and Shavkat's just kind of straight face. That told me he was in the zone, and that told me that, Ian Garry, I don't know, man. I'm not going to say he wasn't in the zone, because I thought he had a really good performance, a lot better performance than I thought he was going to have. But I don't know. Sometimes those interactions, when you start playing with your emotions before the fight, like, oh, we used to be buddies, and now, hey, we're at the day before the fight, we're going to keep hugging and just tell how much each other we appreciate each other. I didn't see that in Shavkat at all. I saw that in a lot in Ian Garry. So, do I think Ian Garry can still become the champion? Of course. This guy is an up-and-coming guy. He knew he was going to have a tough fight. Here's another thing. Ian Garry didn't think he won that fight, in my opinion. I don't care what he says. I don't know if he says he feels he won the fight.
No, he hasn't. He's very much like, what can I just real quick say what he said in the post-fight press?
Yeah,
because I think it's important. He is totally in agreement that he lost, but he's saying, I don't feel like I lost, because he's like, I went out there, I performed the best I could, and I made him look human. Everybody was afraid of him. He couldn't finish me. I nearly finished him. So that's how he feels like he lost, but it was still all in all, like a positive performance.
See, I think at this level, when you're fighting another guy that's undefeated, 18-0, and he was content with just going to decision. You know what I mean? He was happy with it. He felt like, although I lost, it didn't feel like a loss. I understand his circumstance, where he's coming from, but a guy with that championship mindset, it doesn't matter if you're fighting Shavkat, Habib. Like, when you lose, you fucking lose. You know what I mean? And that just tells me that there was something in the back of his head, and I might be wrong. All right. So I know I'm going to get some great criticism for this point, but when guys lose and they're content with losing, which he was content with before the fight started, he already decided in his head, hey, if I lose a decision, that's a win for me. And I don't think that's the right mindset to have when you're going for UFC gold. When you're going against an undefeated fighter and you're undefeated, like, he was content with the loss. He was okay with the loss. I just don't think that's like, I thought I beat Charles Rosa when I fought him. I lost. I was not content with that loss. When I lost to Carl Deaton, I was not content with that loss regardless. And I just felt that he was a little too content with losing, which tells me before the fight, he already made it up in his head. Hey, if I go to decision, that's a win for me.
Okay, well, fair enough. And maybe there's
does that make sense? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
It totally makes sense to me. But again, that's the area where I don't have experience, so I don't know. Like, to me, I was looking at him saying, it's basically taking a positive mindset, an optimistic mindset to the outcome. So I didn't necessarily look at it as a negative, but that's where stuff that I don't. Maybe that is a problematic mindset. So I was just looking at it that way. I'm like, all right, he's trying to find the good and the bad, if that makes sense.
Well, I just try to relate it to myself, man. When I look at the positions I've been in, when I've been in situations to where I'm going against a fighter that's much better than me, and I'll know. I mean, like, when you match up with somebody, like, where you match good against them, where you match bad against them. Like, there's been situations, and not so much as a professional, but as an amateur, it's like, man, if I remember when I fought in Michigan, I fought Scott Bickerstaff. He was a professional fighter. I was still an amateur, but there was no regulations at that time, so amateurs were allowed to fight pros. And I remember going into the fight like, hey, look, I'm 7-1 as an amateur. I'm going to fight this professional. I'm a professional boxer, professional MMA fighter. My goal, if I can win, great, but I'll be very content with going to decision. And in the third round, I got cut above the eye, and the doctor stopped it. It wasn't hurt, it wasn't finished. It was just I had a cut above the eye. I didn't like the blood going in the eye. So after the fight, like, dude, I just went 3 rounds with a professional. I was content. I was content with losing because it showed me where I stack up against a pro at that time in my career. Now you look at Ian Garry. He loses against an 18-0, 18 finish, MMA fighter. Like, maybe before the fight, like, I mean, obviously he wanted to win. He was trying for the finish in the 5th round. But when you have that mindset of, hey, look, I'm content with losing a decision here because it's going to show me where I am. I don't know, man. Again, I'm not putting Ian Garry down. I like Ian Garry. I think he has a bright future. I still think he become the UFC champion. But just to show his lead up and how he was acting and how he acted before the fight and how he acted after the fight, I think in his head, at one point or another, he decided if I lose by decision, that's still a win for me.
Fair enough. No, that's a great point. Okay, so now Ian Garry has taken the loss. I thought he did a tremendous job, regardless of, like, given the circumstances. It was a great show. I know people were upset, maybe, I guess, or Dana White seemed not too stoked about the fact that there wasn't a finish, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought it was just absolutely incredible to watch both of their strategies play out, and I thought Ian Garry had a great amount of success. So I think he really showed the his full dynamic game, both on the ground and standing, which was really fun. Now we're talking about what's next for Ian Garry, right? You said they want to build him. Man, I would love to see Ian Garry still fight Colby after this Colby fight. I just don't think it's going to happen because I think Colby is just vehemently refusing. I think the only way he would fight Ian Garry next is if the UFC says either you fight Ian Garry or you're cut or something like that, right? Like I think it'd have to be a hardcore, definitive, like, you have to do this and you're not fighting anybody else. But assuming that doesn't happen, I see in the comments from Anakin, and now I know Western Mass Climber said, or somebody else said that he can't, he's like Garry has already said on Ariel Helwani's show today, which I missed, that he's not fighting in London. But what do you think of Ian Garry versus Leon Edwards next, or is there somebody else you have in mind that you'd love to see him face off against?
Now, coming up against this young up-and-comer, to me, Ian Garry's still young. To me, Ian Garry's still up-and-coming. He only has 1 loss on his record. He lost to an undefeated guy that has 18 finishes. He's lost by a very close decision. I think, that, as I said this before in the show about this matchup, I like this matchup. I thought it was going to be a more exciting fight than what it was. But we just took one of the future stars that was undefeated and we gave him a loss. He just took away, in my opinion, a lot of his value. Because, again, Ronda Rousey said it best during her reign. Being undefeated, that 0 on your record is the most important thing in MMA. Staying undefeated as long as you can is the most important thing in MMA. By putting 2 up-and-coming prospects together, we're knocking one of them off. And who knows? If Ian Garry somehow goes out and fights Leon and loses, now he's on a 2-fight losing streak. He just lost so much stock in himself, so much stock in the company. Now where do we go with it? And the more you lose at this level, the easier it is to lose. I think this was a huge mistake from the UFC making this matchup. Now, looking forward, Ian Garry stepped up. Nobody wanted to fight this guy. Ian Garry stepped up. I like Ian Garry. I always have. I didn't think he was going to win this fight, but I really like his personality. The UFC needs to do him a favor and give him an easy fight. Leon Edwards is not that easy fight. All right, Leon Edwards is a guy that can come out there and beat Ian Garry, giving him 2 losses. This is the fight that Ian Garry either needs to fight Joaquin Buckley or Colby Covington after this, all right? He needs a step down in competition. He just fought the best in the division. Why would you match up this guy against another guy that's the best in the division, Leon Edwards, former champ? Yeah, if he beats Leon Edwards, yeah, he's thrown right into title contention. But if he loses, now he's lost 2 in a row. Now what do you do with him?
Right.
Where does he go after 2 losses in a row? He can't beat the guy that couldn't beat the champ. If he loses to Leon Edwards, he can't beat Leon Edwards. Well, Leon Edwards lost to Bilal, so he's definitely not going to get a championship. I think, again, we need to talk about the Joaquin Buckley and the Colby Covington fight, and does he get the winner of that fight or does he get the loser? Because I think he can beat both guys in that fight.
Okay, well, as I said, man, I'm really hoping that they do match him up and force Colby's hand to fight him, because it'd be a great fight. I think Ian Garry's most likely going to win, and the buildup will be tremendous. It's going to boost him up so much, because at this point, Colby is so disliked in the UFC and by fans in general that finally beating him, stopping him, imagine finishing him. dude, that will just skyrocket his stock. So let's pray. Let's hope that the UFC makes this fight. I think it would be tremendous for Ian Garry and for the UFC and for fans. So let's go Ian Garry versus Colby Covington. Now let's real quick talk about Shavkat matching up against Bilal. Of course, like they had, I do want to know your thoughts about when Bilal tried to go in and Joe Rogan.
I didn't see that. I didn't see it.
Oh my God. Bilal tries to go into the cage and to like square off against Shavkat, and UFC security stopped him because they didn't know who he was.
Oh, you know what? I did see that. Yeah, I did see that.
I mean, hey, yo, respect to Bilal. Like, it is, I don't know. It's just kind of funny given all the circumstances of like what people say about Bilal. And then Joe Rogan's like, hey, guys, they need to let him through. They don't know who the champ is. Like he said, I don't think he was trying to poke fun at Bilal, but he just said it as a truism. But yeah, how do you think these two match up? And I mean, do you have an early prediction or do you feel pretty split 50-50 in terms of the outcome?
I think Bilal just has a better style to win this fight. You know, watching Ian Garry, who primarily has a striking base, take Shavkat down, I don't think Bilal is going to have a hard time taking him down. And unfortunately, I think I probably won't even watch the fight just because I just don't care to watch Bilal fight. Again, I'm sure he's a great guy. He's a great fighter, but I don't like wasting my time watching boring fights, man. And I just think it'd be a really boring fight. I saw some holes in Shavkat's game that showed him human. And again, Ian Garry, to me, is a striker at heart. For him to come in and be able to take Shavkat down, take his back, put in a rear naked choke that was very close to finishing, I mean, that just showed me that he has holes in his game. And unfortunately, his holes are where Bilal's strengths are.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I actually enjoyed the Bilal versus Leon fight. I actually didn't mind it. I definitely want to watch it. I'm curious, but that's very interesting insight that you're picking Bilal. And okay, cool. That's good to know. Real quick before we move on, Western Mass Climber did have a comment. He says, I don't think Ian lost any stock. I think I kind of agree with you. If he does lose another fight, I get Justin's point, but
I'm not saying he did with this fight, but I mean, when you're undefeated, you make your shots. Well, now he's lost. He's not undefeated. He'll never be undefeated anymore. And you know what? Ronda Rousey said it best, and that's coming from her mouth. And obviously, she's done a lot more in the UFC than I have. She says when you lose that zero, it's you don't have that bargaining chip. You can't say I'm undefeated. You know, oh, you lost your last fight. And I'll tell you what, and I'm going to be more open about the UFC because obviously I'm not in the UFC anymore. And I'll be honest, when we first started our show, I was very hesitant on what I should say, what I could say, because I didn't want it to get back. But honestly, I don't give a fuck right now. The UFC doesn't give a fuck about their fighters. All right. They like, hey, you know what? You can get, oh, well, I went out there and I lost a tough decision. Well, Dana White didn't like the fight. He wasn't impressed by the fight. So you don't have that bargaining chip. Now you've lost. You know, I'm not saying he's lost all his stock. That's not what I'm saying. But it's definitely something where the UFC can and will say, well, you lost. Well, you lost. Well, you lost. You don't have that bargaining chip anymore. And again, I'm not saying he lost all his stock, but he's in a position now. If he loses 2 in a row, he's not going to get cut. But then what? Now what?
Right.
You know, if he goes against Leon Edwards and loses to a guy that couldn't beat Bilal, where does he get put in the rankings? He's going to be in like 7th, 8th, 9th. And now what do we do with him? Now we have to get him that match with Colby because the UFC is going to want him to get him to win. The guy is a genius on the mic. He's like, I'm not going to say he's Conor McGregor 2.0. There's no Conor McGregor. I don't care if you're Ian Garry. I don't care if you're there's no Conor McGregor. And people are comparing him. I think it's an unfair comparison because Conor is a master. Like there's only one other guy that I think is as good as Conor on the mic, and that's Chael Sonnen. And Chael Sonnen, the only reason I say Chael Sonnen is good on the mic is just because he's so outlandish. And he's very, very clever, and he's very, very smart. I think that Conor McGregor is a lot quicker, and he's a lot more witty. But with that being said, Ian Garry's great on the mic, but again, he's lost now, and he doesn't have. Again, I don't know. I want to explain this right because again, I'm not saying he's not worth anything. Of course, he's worth something, but having a loss on your record definitely affects it. And 2 losses could be detrimental.
Fair enough. Okay, Anakin says, give Garry to Brian battle. I know he's joking. That'd be pretty funny.